My name's Tim Folta. I'm the STR division chair, and we're here to honor one of our finest scholars, Chang. I'm particularly pleased to be doing this. Jin and I are nearly the same vintage. I think he has me by a year or two. And his work and the work of his contemporaries and his advisors actually inspired me quite a bit. So when the opportunity came to interview Jin, I jumped at it. I know him, a little bit. I took this as an opportunity to get to know him a little bit better. We work in the same space, and I'm a big fan of his work, so it's certainly a pleasure to be here. And to tell you the truth, the only other Meet the Scholar interview I did was with his advisor, Harbir Singh. I think it was back in July. So it's a pleasure to be here with him. So let me tell you a little bit about Jin. He is currently at National University of Singapore, where he's the Lim Kim San Chair Professor. He got his PhD in '92. Sorry, Jin, I expressed the timing there. At Wharton, and his advisor was Harbir. He has many citations. He's got at least 28 publications. I think this undercounts. And he's got several in Korean journals. He's well awarded. He won the division's Best Paper Award at the 2012 conference. He's a fellow. He's been inducted as a fellow at AIB. He's won several awards in Korea, recognized for his research. Interestingly, and I'll ask him about this a little bit later, he's also got some books. These are just 4 books he has in English, and they're all with top publishers, Oxford and Cambridge and Wiley and so forth. So fabulous. And I'm not even mentioning the Korean books, so maybe you can tell us a bit about those. He's contributed to the division as an editor, both with the ICC and SMJ and JIBS, and he's on editorial boards at present and previously. He's worked with PhD students, and I suppose most people that are on know where his research is, how it's defined, and what the bounds of it are, but it's reasonably broad in the area of corporate strategy, foreign direct investments, non-market strategies recently, entry and exit, uses resource-based theory, evolutionary theory, diversification, and so forth. So it's a pleasure to have you, Jin, and look forward to chatting with you over the next little bit. For those of you who are on, we'll probably do a back and forth with Jin for about 45 minutes, and then have a dialogue with you folks. Okay, so welcome, Jin. Any initial comments?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me for this event. I'm really honored to be invited and part of this STR initiatives. I'm, in this time of COVID, and I'm really glad to meet many our colleagues and future colleagues. So I'm really happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was a PhD student back in '92, thinking I wanted to do a dissertation on strategic groups. And, at Purdue, where I was going, we have a tradition of strategic groups. And I went to I think it was the '92 Academy of Management, and I saw Dong-Jae Kim present a paper on technological platforms. And I thought, using real option theory. And I thought, this is cool. This is cutting edge stuff. And so I read that paper and was directed to some of Jin's work when he was fresh out of Wharton. So would you mind talking a little bit about your experience at Wharton and how that shaped you, and And a little bit about your dissertation research.
Sure. And I must say, I was very lucky to be at Wharton at that point of time. Probably was really a high point at the strategy PhD program. I joined there 88 and finished at 92. And I was fortunate enough to have a Javier Singh as an advisor. And I also have a Bruce Kogut and Dan Levinson and Ned Bowman. Probably, I'm not sure how many people we know Ned Bowman, but he's really a great scholar, very old gentleman, but very clear, crisp mind and thinking. And I also have a Hubert Gattignon from marketing on the methodology. So it's kind of all-star team. But it was all luck. And when I applied for the PhD program, I have no idea what Wharton was about. So it was back in 1988. And I was like a graduate student economics program at the Seoul National University in Korea. And actually, I had no idea of what PhD program there are. And I applied based upon after I realized that it was based on MBA ranking. So I just look at the top 10 MBA school and wrote them to send me an application form. And by the time my wife also applied for the PhD program, and she's a she was doing music composition PhD. So both of us applied to school at the same time. So closest place we got admission with the scholarship was the Wharton for me and the Columbia for my wife. So actually we literally look at the map and measure them the distance.
Anna, hear your phone.
Hello. Oh yeah. So it was a funny story. So it was we look at the map and decide it was close enough. So we flew to arrive in Philadelphia and New York City, and then decide where to live. And we look around the place to live in Philadelphia and also New York City or somewhere in the middle, like Princeton. And finally, we decided to live in the Philadelphia, which probably was cheaper. And then my wife commute from Philadelphia to New York City. So it was really, I was really, dumbstruck. And I didn't know about the PhD program, who are there in the faculty. And I arrived at Wharton and realized that, the Wharton at the time has a, really great strategy faculty. So I worked with Bruce Kogut and Javier Singh and closely, and also Dan give me a good feedback. So my dissertation was, the team mentioned that it was a blend of evolutionary theory and the corporate strategy at that time. So it was the evolutionary perspective of diversification and corporate restructuring. I think that is the title of my 1996 SMJ piece. I took several years to publish that. And well, I got the idea from being a TA in a Javier's class. So Javier Singh was teaching an MBA class on the corporate developments, mergers and acquisition. I was doing his PhD with TA and in his class. At one class, he discussed the Philip Morris case. So there's a Philip Morris tobacco company trying to diversify into many different areas.
Right, trying to develop new capabilities, probably.
Yeah. So it was a really interesting case. So the case described that Philip Morris did have no idea where to diversify. So initially bought the Wrigley, a chewing gum company at the time. And then it tried, it didn't work it out. And later it tried again for the razor company, men's razor, like Gillette, and it didn't work out. So after a couple of the acquisition, Philip Morris realized that, okay, for my next diversification move, I will buy a company with marketable size, and it has to be not price sensitive, so I can use my advertising know-how. So I think the most successful diversity move was the Miller acquisition. So being a TA sitting on the back of the class and student talking about all the trial experiment, what we call now, Philip Morris did on diversification. So give me some idea of, maybe the firm doesn't have a very clear idea of where to go. So it was very much like doing a search for the new business to enter. At the same time, look internally, which business to exit. So the diversification and restructuring is actually a continuum of the sequential entry and exit. That's become a basis for my dissertation.
Tim,
So,
sure. Tim, before you go on, would you mind on sharing the screen?
Oh, yeah.
Well, is there some funny pictures?
No.
Okay, so it's good. So I can see everybody, much bigger picture.
Oh, okay, that's a great story, Sejal. Okay, so yeah, you can see how you get a mix of, the learning, the organizational learning. So you get Leventhal, the sequential entry stuff, you get Kogut's influence there, and Harbier, of course, in the context, mergers and acquisitions, and his expertise in the resource base. So fabulous. That's helpful. Can you talk a little bit about some of those characters that you work with? Some of the personalities, the people that we hold in such high esteem?
Well, Javier is really a great person to work with. I think the one thing, one great virtue of Javier is he's very pragmatic. So he knows what can be done. So he doesn't push you too hard to spend another 1 or 2 more years at PhD program. He knows exactly how much he can push, and he's very pragmatic and very helpful. So in a sense, he's really a great dissertation advisor. Bruce Kogut he's very creative, and he's very critical, and he has a sharp mind. And he has always looking for a new idea, and he even though he's starting from economics and he went to the sociology and political science, and I was really amazed by his intellectual diversity. And Ben, as you know, he's also very much, clear thinker, and he has a model in his mind, so he can explain as if he's writing like equation for the model. So in that regard, he was very helpful too. And also, I learned a great deal about methodology for marketing. So actually, it was Javier to suggest me to take the marketing methodology class. So because marketing has only methodology and data according to someone. So I learned a methodology from marketing. So it was really helpful too. So in the regard, I think that PhD program is really a great place to write a great dissertation piece. So you can work with great scholar, and they give you groundwork with coursework, and then they will give you a feedback to write a better dissertation piece. So I think that probably you can. So I will advise the PhD students to use the dissertation to develop much more groundbreaking, much more creative piece, which people will remember you, associate with you as a scholar.
Okay. So that you told us a little bit about how your research began and who inspired it. Can you talk about how it's evolved? Because in some ways, where you are now is not too distant from where you were when you started, but in other ways, you sure have traveled, a very interesting path. Would you mind talking about that? Maybe the theories that you're in?
Yeah. I think that the one theory my wife is that I have a karma of going traveling many different places. So my karma is in my previous life, I might be a wanderer or something like that.
Right.
So my name, actually Sijin in Chinese character means go international. So I was born to be international. So that's my destiny, which I have to admit.
Interesting.
But something is related to my, so I actually, grew up in Korea and do the master degree in economics in Korea. So I have the PhD. I got my first job was NYU Stern School, and but I decided to go back to Korea after 3 years at NYU, because my wife by that time finished a PhD. And music composition is very difficult to get a job in the teaching position in the U.S. school at the time. Maybe still now. So she decided to come back to Korea, so I had to follow her. So we moved to Korea in '95, and I spent almost like 15 years there. So, but 20 years in Korea, probably the Korea has become much better environment for research these days. But at that time, it was most Korean schools are teaching school. So I taught 4 classes a semester. So I teach 8 courses a year for 14 years.
Wow.
So when I was young, I could do that. Probably I could still write a piece. But because during the regular semester, you cannot find the time to research because you are teaching like 4 courses with street prep. So I taught a variety of I can teach microeconomics, I can teach econometrics, I can teach international business, I can teach strategy, I can teach M&A. So I taught many different courses. So the only way I could do research was to get away from Korea during the summer break and the winter break. So I spent 2 months in the summer and 2 months in the winter. That's the break time in Korea. So I always find a place some place to go. Sometime I come back to Wharton, sometime I come back to NYU Stern School, sometime I come to place where my courses are. So that's explain why I've been traveling so much, or having a visiting position so much. So this is the only time I could do research.
Okay, so you spent 2 months in the winter, 2 months in the summer.
Summer, right.
I was wondering, because you've been a visiting prof just about all the top places, right? So that's what you do,
Yeah, and I think the one good thing about Korea University, my former institution, was that they give like 1 year sabbatical after 6 years, but you can use 6 months after 3 years. So I took a 6-month segment after 3 years too, to continue to my research. And also, my location has some impact on my topic for my research. So I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a phenomena-driven scholar. Some people may have some stigma against the phenomena-driven research, but I'm not ashamed of that. And I'm not a theory-driven person, so to speak. I'm looking for an interesting phenomena. I want to, research is sometimes very lonely work, right? So sometimes, when I write a paper, I was wondering how many people will read my piece. I will toil my 3 years to publish a paper in a, let's say, A journal or top journal, right? How many people will read this? Maybe 300, if I'm lucky, 1,000. So, unless it's rewarding you, it is not worth it. So the paper has to be interesting enough for me to motivate and investigate and research. So maybe the Wharton is more like a pragmatic tradition. It's more phenomena driven, and also corporate strategy area is also phenomena driven too. So my PhD dissertation, my early work is purely US data, diversification, restructuring, and FDI, sequential FDI, joint ventures, that kind of stuff. But when I moved to Korea, so I have to find a topic which I could do in the Korean context. So I pick up the Korean business group and publish a couple of pieces there around the topic. Because so my approach is that business group is a form of diversified cooperation, which can show some features that the consolidate, conglomerate, or diversified firm, maybe in the US and Europe, cannot show. Because it's diversified, but each business is a separate entity, legal entity. Some are listed company with a separate financial statement, and some of the internal transactions within a group are recorded in the footnote item, so I can collect such data. So I could trace some intra-group resource sharing. So how much money is flowing from here to there, and whether if group level like a technology investment and advertising can have an impact on the individual affiliate performance, and to what extent the executive rotate within a group. So this is interdivisional executive transfer. So I use that opportunity. So I end up in Korea, teaching school where the research was not valued. But I try my best to find something which I can do in that environment. So that's the reason why I invested several years in my research doing the business group related study. And then around like 2004, 2005, the China become interesting. China become, the focus of everybody and become a stellar of emerging market companies. So I studied for several years on the Chinese data, with the Chinese data, and looking at some research on the Chinese context.
And I understand you're learning a little Chinese, is that right?
Yeah. So I studied Chinese for about a year.
Yeah. And I reached out to a couple of your colleagues in preparation for this, and one of them was Brian Wu.
Oh yeah. Right.
And he's a co-author, and you guys did that paper on institutions and
right.
in China and entry.
Right.
And he elaborated a bit about your intellectual curiosity. And for example, Japanese, you're learning Chinese, you did a lot of field work in that data. You interviewed lots and lots of managers, and that's consistent with what you just described about how it's got to interest you, and you're phenomena driven and so forth. So,
right. So it's actually for fun. For myself, very selfish motivation. I'm doing what interests me. So my mother complains about me. If you have a son as a doctor, and every family member will benefit. If you have a lawyer as your son is a lawyer, then your relatives, the entire branch of family will get benefit. When you become a professor, you just benefit yourself. That's why my mother complains about me.
Oh.
So I like my job as a professor. It's really a nice job. May not be a very helpful son in that regard.
Okay, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, because your path, I think you just made it part way down that path. So there's several gaps to fill in. One is this focus on China. Two, you've done some work on corporate effects, the variance decomposition that would be interesting to hear about. And recently you're getting into some non-market strategy, which is a hot topic as well, right?
I don't claim that much. I only have one paper with my former students. I'm more like a pro-market strategy person.
But could you talk a little bit about So, for example, variance decomposition. What inspired that? There, of course, there's a whole realm of papers there.
Right. Actually, there is a chapter in my dissertation. Actually, Ned Bowman, who was the dissertation committee chair, he pushed me to write another chapter on variance decomposition. So do you know that the Ned Bowman and the Coney Helford had a paper on variance decomposition?
Yeah.
So that's about size of corporate fact. So I happen to have a data on the market share of individual firm. So I use what they call a TriNet database for my dissertation, and that gives you sales and employee data at the 4-digit SIC level. So I could replicate the variance decomposition technique as the market share as a dependent variable. So when people using the profitability as a dependent variable decompose it, and I use the market share as a dependent variable because it's available. So I have a market share data. I can calculate it in multiple level of aggregation. So that's a plus and negative in terms of the value as a dependent variable. So because it's not a profitability, so some people may say, why are you looking at market share? Why not profitability? That can be a critique. But one benefit of market share is that I can aggregate from the 2-digit level to 3-digit level to the 4-digit level. So I can test whether the variance decomposition is sensitive to how you define the market. And also I can look at whether corporate effect can be stronger in the smaller firm or medium-sized firm and to the large-sized firm.
Okay, interesting.
So I had the SMJ paper in 2001, around at the time. So looking at the decomposing the market share as a dependent variable. And then I also applied the technique to the Korean business group. So my argument is that, so actually what I learned from the variance decomposition exercise is that it's very sensitive to the sample. If you decompose the variance in the context of the large corporation as the FTC dataset, then you will get a small corporate effect. But if you do the same in the context of business group in Korea, I expect to have a larger corporate effect because market is not so efficient. So that's the claim.
Interesting. Okay, I want to make sure we get to your entry into books. Can you talk a little bit about books? So what's inspired you to write these books? I guess I've got a glimpse into that a little bit because you're so phenomena-driven, but really been successful, more successful than most people.
Right.
In doing
Actually, I was very successful in one particular book. So I wrote a book, Sony versus Samsung. It was published by the Wiley in 2008. I think it sold more than 50,000 copies.
Nice.
So it was translated to Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, Thai, Russian.
Great.
So it was successful, but it was a fun book. It was really a fun project. And I didn't expect any academic credit for that kind of book. It's more like a case book, but it came along as an opportunity to learn. So I happened in around 2005, the Sony's market cap will become a 1/2 of what is a Samsung. So 10 years ago, it was like a 4-to-1 ratio. Now it become 1-to-2. So I suddenly become interested in what make a Sony, who was a star in the consumer electric sector, become a disgrace, and how come the Samsung, who was nobody in the consumer electric, become like a darling in the industry. So I happen to know Mr. Ando, who was the former president of Sony Corporation. I met him in 1990, about 10 years ago, when I was still at NYU. I had an interview with him about Sony's strategy in the United States. I still kept his, the name card. So I emailed him after 10 years. He replied back to me. So he agreed to meet with me in Japan. So I went there, and then I had a 2 hours interview with him just for fun, catching up with him and hearing about his story. I became interested about his story. And so he introduced a couple of more people to talk. So with this introduction, I met 4 other people. And after 4 people, they introduced some other people to talk to. So it snowballed. I visited almost like probably 10 times or 12 times to Japan to conduct an interview from all the way up to Mr. Ide, who was the CEO of Sony. So I also have a connection in Samsung because I'm Korean. I have many friends working for Samsung. So I also have an interview all the way to the CEO. So it took me almost 1.5 years, almost 2 years to conduct the interview and writing a book. So it was a fun book. So main story of the book, so my original intake was that Sony and Samsung took a very different approach. The Samsung is more like focusing on the raw materials, and raw materials is more like a, upstream semiconductor and key component. And the Sony tried to create a wow product, focusing on the downstream with the consumer more innovative product. So my original take was which approach was better in the digital revolution. That was my initial thesis. So when I continue on the interview, I learned that actually the strategy didn't matter. What mattered was an execution and the leadership and organization. So Sony's strategy could have worked with a different CEO, with different organization. And probably Samsung was more successful because it focused on the commodity product like a DRAM, is quite matched with its very bureaucratic structure, militaristic structure, and the top-down corporate culture. So it was more like a culture, organization, leadership, and strategy was more aligned. There was a success behind the Samsung. But in case of Sony, it initially had very charismatic leader at the founder generation. But when it progressed to the professional management, there was a mismatch. The Mr. Ide was like a first professional manager. And the succession was not very smooth.
Professional as opposed to family manager?
It's the founder. So the Mr. Ibuka and Mr. Morita was a 2 founder of the Sony Corporation. The first CEO was Mr. Oga. He wasn't a founder, but he was from the founder generation. So he behaved like a founder. And he was a professional opera singer, and he has a really loud voice. So when he says "shut up," then it was so loud, everybody has to shut up. But Mr. Ide was the first CEO who became a CEO but he joined as the bottom of organization. He grew up in the organization, so he didn't have a clout as a founder generation. But Sony was very liberal company and very decentralized structure. So weak CEO didn't work well with this liberal organization, decentralized structure. So even though Mr. Ide has a good idea, his strategy was not very much well implemented.
So how did that make you feel that essentially my interpretation is that process trumps content every time? Is that true?
Sorry, process content.
Yeah.
Well, at the end, I think that it has to come from both sides, right? So you have to have a good strategy to begin with. If a strategy is not a good idea, you will not have a good result. But also it has to match with your leadership style, organization, and the corporate culture. So this is what we usually teach in the core strategy class. I don't know how you guys are teaching the core strategy module, but I emphasize the role of the more like a fit with your strategy content and the organization you can implement the strategy. So it has to be both, not either one.
Right. Yeah, and you have at least 3 other books in English.
Right. There was the 3 books in about the Chevels and business group. So I think that the book, those kind of book came along after publishing several papers on the same topic. So you have a more material which you can put in the paper form. So I thought that it was a good idea to put them together and publish in a book. So some of the book chapters come from the published paper, but I also have other stuff not able to put it in the paper form. So book is more like a closure of my research project, or specific research project.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and I'm curious, after the success with the Sony Samsung book, were the publishers pretty easy to get on board with your subsequent projects?
Yes, yes, but unfortunately I do not have the second opportunity like that, like in Sony versus Samsung case. So my next book was the multinational company in China. It was more like academics book. So we published in Oxford Press. So I'm looking for another book, but I want to have some opportunity to come along with that, which can open the door for the company. Yeah,
and you don't have anything you're working on right now, no books that you're working on?
Yeah, no book. Yeah, I wish I could write a sequel to Sony versus Samsung, like Samsung versus Apple, and maybe Tesla can be an interesting book. But unfortunately, Apple and Tesla are very secret companies, so I do not have opportunity yet.
Okay. Well, let
someday.
me ask a couple of things. One of the things I wanted to touch base on, we have this little, the STR division has this little set of short videos that we call nuggets, nuggets of advice mostly to young scholars and so forth. Do you have any advice that you would pass on? I know you work with some doctoral students. In your experience, is there anything that stands out as being particularly important to consider as a young scholar? And you mentioned something already. Maybe that was
right.
Want to highlight.
Right. So I think that to pursue an interesting topic or phenomena is a very good starting point to write interesting dissertation, which interests you first before make other people interested, right? So that's the first thing. And in order to do that, you would really have to have a broad interest. So I really enjoyed reading The Economist magazine because I always learn something by reading The Economist magazine, especially not just the business section, but the science and technology section. I learn a lot. And I also read the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and Harvard Business Review. So even though they are not scholarly journal, I want to keep update of what's going on in the real world, and hopefully find some interesting topic which I can pursue for the next couple of years. So and also the teaching can be an opportunity for research too. So I give you how I got an idea for my dissertation topic by being a TA. So sitting in the MBA class and how the students talk about the case, you can get some idea which you can apply in your research.
Right. so corporate strategy more broadly, are there any topics that you're particularly passionate about right now in your research? And even more broadly, perhaps you have some thoughts on some things that corporate strategists should be working on.
Right. So actually, probably the team, you and I have some common interests. I'm very much into resource redeployment topic these days, because the corporate strategy have generated many research papers to date, but somehow I think there's a lot of data constraint. So everybody hate R&D intensity and advertising intensity, but still we use it, right? So I still use it, so I don't blame other. Because sometimes, from the accounting data is maybe the only data you can easily use. So, but those kind of data doesn't push the field very far. So I think in the future research, I think we should try to measure resources more directly. So I know the team has a paper on measuring the resource directly by looking at the retail chain store, right? The retail store, physical store, and how they are redeployed among the sibling chains, right? So that's very, good empirical strategy, because, those kind of physical store is easily observable, and you know the location, and you know what kind of store format it was used before and how it was transformed to the another brand. So, that's a good empirical strategy. But sometimes I think we should try to capture the resources more directly. But it's a hard, even though I suggest that direction. So no company will give you data on their resources freely, right? That they are not going to reveal how many machines, how many employees, what kind of skill they have. They don't give it out to you. So it requires a lot of data collecting effort. But I think that more and more, I think we should try harder to get closer to the resources, because we still dwell on the resource-based theory, but we do not measure resources.
Yeah, we talk very abstractly about, not only do we not measure resources, but we also, there's a bundling process that takes place that that may influence, for example, whether they're scalable or non-scalable.
Right. There's a lot of characteristics of resources.
Well, just so everybody listening, we did not plan to. I did not plant that question, so I'm glad you find that research stream interesting, and I agree there's plenty more to do.
Right.
Well, we're nearly to the Q&A point. Let's see. Do you mind if I read this this note from Brian Wu, and maybe you want to respond to it? So I just asked Brian. I said, I know Sijin a little bit, but can you give me any little nuggets? And he says, well, Sijin's great. He says, other than his well-known scholarly achievements, I'm particularly impressed by his curiosity across different cultures. I remember we did many field interviews together in China for our paper on institutional barriers and industry dynamics. He was earnest in learning Chinese and many institutional and cultural details. By the way, he also speaks Japanese and did lots of high-quality research on that important topic. I think he exemplifies scholarship on corporate strategy and international business. And Harbir Singh had some wonderful things to say too. So you've got some fans out there, Sijin, and I'm sure the many participants today are some of those fans. But let's open it up to some questions here. Let's see. Feel free to ask any. So One question is, this is Abi Mulik. Could you ask your question?
Sure. Hi, Professor Chang. This is Abi Malik.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey and your research vision. I think it's such a testament to seeing both curiosity and an interest in pragmatism to be manifested in your work, which I think is great. I was curious about what we can call your brief foray into non-market strategy and what got you interested in that, and particularly the paper, which I think that the 2018 SMJ contingent effects and political strategies, because I think it was so cool to see kind of moving beyond companies and thinking about non-market actors competition affecting firms in return. So if you could speak to that a little bit, that'd be great.
Right, actually, it was, I cannot claim that much because it was my student's dissertation piece. But he initially submitted a single author piece, but he had some difficulty in doing the review process. So he helped me. He asked me to join afterwards. So in a sense, I was very reluctant to join the authorship there. It's supposed. So my take is that students has to publish a single author piece for his dissertation. Maybe a second paper I can co-author with them, but they had to keep their main piece a single author piece if they can. So basically, Jackie, he was a student, and he's now at the Hong Kong University. So he look at so that's probably similar like a way we discuss resource-based theory. You look at political non-market strategy, but oftentimes people looking at the spending, like lobbying, hiring lobbyists, how much you spend on the lobbying in the U.S. context, right? So I think that the Jackie looking at much more detail at the individual decision maker. So if there's a provincial level, the leaders and their background and executive background, and they also have some other controlling actor. So if each provincial actor, they want to promote their business within their province. So they may say against of acquisition which is acquiring from a company from the another province. But they can be more like a superseding actor at the central government level who can intervene and be on your favor. So you can think about multiple actors, from the CEO to the top management team of the company, and the provincial leaders, and also the central committee leaders. So he was able to manage the career history of all the decision makers, and then determine whether the proposal to acquire a company from another province was successful or not in that particular piece. So in that regard, I think one good thing about that paper is that looking at the decision makers and their background and the relationship among those decision makers at multiple levels. Okay. But that's only one piece, and I don't claim that much on that paper.
So that was more pragmatism than curiosity, I guess.
Yeah, right. Getting through the review processing and have this paper to publish.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And our host, Zhao, has a question or two there.
Thanks, Sijin and Tim, for this amazing interview. I have two questions, Sijin. One is, as AIB fellow, what do you see are some of the important questions in IM that hasn't been answered yet, and where would you encourage people to go towards? The second question is related to being a scholar based out of Asia. What are some of the challenges / benefits, as well as how have you, in your experience, has that changed over time?
Okay, good question. So IM, international business, is another phenomena-driven area. And, I think that there is some kind of like some tension between like discipline-oriented research versus phenomena-driven research. So somehow I'm on the other side, more the phenomena-driven research. So it has a pros and cons. The pro side is that you are doing some interesting stuff. But the con side is that you will be challenged from the discipline-based people, asking you what are your theory, what is your theoretical contribution. So IB, international business, international management, has a similar challenge as corporate strategy in that regard. So, but the international business, I think that the same as corporate strategy is that interesting phenomena is happening every single day, right? So there's Donald Trump impact. Unfortunately for research, maybe unfortunately for some country, but so you have some strange effect, which is some which you can consider exogenous, and a lot of things change since before Donald Trump and after Donald Trump, and also from the COVID, right?
Yeah.
And there's a trade-off between efficiencies versus robustness or reliability issue, right? And whether the competition become more regionalized, that's become an important issue. And whether these like internet technology or Zoom internet conference, online conference will centralize the management or decentralize the management. There's a lot of interesting questions thanks to the technology or political change, and also the US-China, the conflict is another dimension which will interest many IB scholars. So if you're looking for an interesting topic to study, so you're in a good place. You're either an IM or corporate strategy. Welcome to the real world, right? And I'm sorry, what is your second question? I am getting.
Yeah. So the second question is about the challenges and benefits.
For being
scholars.
in Asia, for being in Asia, right?
Yeah.
So even though I base in Asia, I don't think I'm not necessarily doing research only for the Asia. So I think that Asian scholar, so we are all in the publishing business. So we all publish in a top tier journal. But if you want to make a statement which is very much relevant to the region, it's not going to end up in a top journal or a journal you want to place, right? So even though you are using Asian context or Asian data, you have to address the core research problem in the field, right? So it has to be that Asian context may be a convenient place to address the research question. So I think that the challenge, I think also the opportunity of Asian scholar is the how to find a data or phenomena from Asia, but can making a core strategy question. So that'll be the challenges. So some people may wonder, if you use a Chinese data or Korean data, how can you publish the stuff? How can you convince the reviewer? So actually, reviewer, doesn't challenge me whether I'm using the Chinese data or Korean data, but I have to ensure that there's no systematic error in the data. There's no bias. So I look at the data very carefully, and so I have to convince the reader this is the reliable data, and then give you some interesting look at some important strategy question which has not been addressed yet.
Great. I have a follow-on question to that. Zhao's question relating to the dynamic capabilities. You could argue that your work on evolutionary entry or sequential entry is a dynamic capabilities, and one of the first empirical papers using that particular theoretical approach have you followed that literature, and what's your view on dynamic capabilities and how it's progressing as a theory?
So I think the dynamic capability is interesting theory, interesting idea. But I don't know yet how we can measure them and how we can avoid from the tautology. So it's supposed to affect the performance, right? So how can you separate from performance from the dynamic capability? And without measuring them directly, it'll be very difficult to convince the reader that it was the dynamic capability which make the performance to be higher. I think that's the challenge we have to address as a scholar. But it's an interesting concept, an important concept. I think it has to be further explored.
Okay, interesting. And is it Nare Lee? Would you mind asking your question there?
Hi, my name is Nare, and
yes.
you may have touched this question when you're answering to Zhao's first question about phenomena that could be interesting to the IB scholars, and I'm wondering whether there is any phenomenon that interests you particularly, what's happening lately, whether it's Asia specific or not.
Well, there are so many interesting phenomena. So like, the US-China trade conflict and the global supply chain is changing, right? So now the optimal, disbursement or location of the resources over the world, the supply chain has to be modified, right? So it'll be interesting to see how firms may act differently according to their strategy. So that's maybe an interesting question. And I also see, every single day there's an interesting phenomenon, like, suddenly, TSMC is doing very well, and even the Intel is trying to do foundry businesses on the side. So if you are interested in the semiconductor industry, maybe you can see how the firm strategy. So there's the integrate device manufacturer who is like Intel or Samsung. And there was a specialized company on the design side, which is called the fabless company, and the foundry who was doing only the manufacturing, right? So this already happening in semiconductor industry, but do you see any such division of labor in other industry? Okay, so just focusing on the designing only one segment in the entire value chain, and some other specialized company taking over the other part of the value chain. So that's really an interesting question, right? And also performance implication about that, right? Well,
question for you. In looking at your CV, I see you've written quite a few cases. Can you talk a little bit about that and how it's affected your teaching?
Well, it was while I was in Korea, so I was teaching so many different classes. So I end up producing a lot of case for my own teaching. So most of cases is a Korean case. Only one or two was doing in English, right? So I think the writing case is helpful because you know the company well enough, and then you know your teaching plan in your mind when you're writing a cases. So that makes you very good in class. But it linked a lot of It's not a lot of investment, but maybe if you can write one case a year, it's not a bad idea. It's not that much painful. So if some company is interesting, then why not writing a case for your own teaching purpose?
Interesting.
So, I think that there's a lot of library case. You don't have to do a field research to write a teaching case.
Oh, is that right? So you don't go out in the field when you do that?
Sometimes, yeah, I go on a field, but it's not required. That's what I'm trying to say. But if you can access the company, have a more interview to augment your like a field, like a library research, that will be much better.
Interesting. Good for you. Let's see. Miros has a question. Miros, would you join us?
Hi. Yes. Thank you very much for the session. I just had a quick question. As I understood, these visiting positions were very instrumental to your research output. I was wondering if you could share what were you like a little bit about the ways that you were arranging them, what were you looking in that environment, how are you making sure that your time is well spent, because just moving is quite disruptive to the research. At least, I mean, so I was wondering how you were managing that.
Right. But in my case, I was like escaping from Korea, the teaching environment over there. So probably the benefit exceeding the moving costs and other disruption you may associate with the moving, right? But I think that also the giving, like placing yourself in a new environment will inspire in many ways, because each school is different and you are getting to know the colleagues over there. And because you get to know people, and once you get to know people, it's much easier to follow them up with email or like a Zoom and other. So I think it's really good if you're willing to take up all the pains of moving, then it's maybe a very worthwhile effort. So I suggest you move to use the sabbatical as much as you can to find a place to relocate yourself, and in the giving you more inspiring environment and intellectual shock. But with COVID, I now begin to think somewhat differently, right? So I begin to rethink about the concept of colleague, right? So I used to have a concept of colleague. The colleague is somebody whose office are next door, right? Which can, whom I can always talk to. I can knock on the door, having a lunch, having a chat, asking about this question, the reviewers comment, and something like that, right? So I think this COVID was an interesting experiment on our side, involuntarily, I must admit. But so you don't have a colleague next door. You're locked in your home, right, doing your research. And colleague I define now is somebody who can talk to over the internet. It doesn't have to be someone in the next door. It doesn't have to be in the same school. So colleague is somebody you can have an intellectual discussion with. So if you get to know someone by attending a conference, maybe meeting some person for some occasion, then it's very easy to follow them up and to talk them on the Zoom. So
Maurice, did you get what you wanted out of that?
No, I mean, it's very, very good. So just like, I mean, a little bit more about, so what are the aspects that you consider in the conversations? I don't want to just like take too much time, but like, anything that has been instrumental to your process of like meeting other people in the, environment.
I'm not that, sociable. I mean, I'm not the outgoing person, so I don't know whether I'm a fun person to work with. I'm not sure, but I think that so those people who graduate at the same time, meeting at a conference or consortium, so you can build up relationship with them and then continue working with them formally or informally. So once you get to know them, it's easier for you to comment on your paper. Yeah. So remember that the colleague doesn't have to be your next door.
That's good advice. Yeah, that's one thing that I take away too, is it's just so easy to reach out virtually like this. And, you know, morose people in this field are surprising, and I suppose most academics are surprisingly accessible, you know. If you just reach out, they generally respond. And I'm sure Sijin's found that. I was kind of curious how you manage the process of going to all these places. So let's say you're thinking about summer of 2022, and you want to go somewhere 2 months. So you send somebody an email, and somebody you know at that institution, and say, hey.
Right. Yeah. So I think that if you don't ask money, then the usual, if you can be modest, saying that I want to spend 2 months there, and then I don't need much. If you can have a shared office space, they will be good, and something like that.
Yeah.
So I think the schools has become more difficult these days in getting a visa in the US. Or sometimes even for 2 months, they may say you have to apply for a formal visiting position and ask for a visa, right? But in old days, it was not like that.
Okay, I have a few more questions. I'm supposed to ask these, I guess. Let's see. How do you see impact of open source journals on promoting quality of original strategy research? Open source journals. Do you think that involving direct money into publication process may reduce quality indirectly?
Actually, I'm actually dumbstruck. I don't know what is I never experienced this, and so open source journal.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay, you pass on that one. Okay, sorry about that.
So maybe I have to. So can you explain what is open source journal, and what example?
Yeah, I think it's just a journal that's not published in print, but it's free to the public, and anybody can. If you submit something, it doesn't mean your work's going to be accepted, but if you submit I don't know, it's just not print, right? Somebody else help me here. What is an open source journal? Is that right? Here's another question for you. Can you share your time management strategy? What's your typical work day? So they're asking, how can you be so productive, Sijin? How do you manage your time?
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm very good in time management. But one thing that I'm doing is I wake up early in the morning. I usually get up like 6 and then work until 12 I'm trying not to be interrupted until 12. So all my teaching and office hours and meetings are in the afternoon. So, but I sleep early and wake up very early in the morning and try to have like a quality time from 6 to 12, maybe 7 to 12. So I think that having some like block of time is good for productivity rather than 1 hour here and 1 hour there, because you need to warm up yourself, right, to get into your thinking. So in terms of time management, block your time, and either early morning or late at night, whether you're night person or morning person, whichever work for you.
So what if you're working at an institution and somebody wants to schedule a meeting in the morning? Let's say you're on a committee. Do you just block out your schedule, or what do you do?
Well, then I have to compromise, right? So it's okay. Having some gray hair is an advantage. As I grow older, become easier to avoid the morning meeting. But when I was younger and with black hair, I didn't have much choice.
Okay, great. Let's see, Zhao, do you want to take the picture? Is it a good time?
Yes, perfect.
Oh,
thank you.
So it's a picture taking?
Yeah, so generally we smile and we want to post this on our social media. So.
Yes,
okay.
So
okay.
everyone, if you're comfortable switching on your camera for a second. Awesome. Okay, 1, 2, 3, say cheese.
Cheese.
Got it, thank you. Back to you, Tim.
You bet. Now you've been, are you still affiliated with KAIST or?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
How does that work? You've got these two affiliations.
Oh, yeah. This is, I spent 6 months in Singapore and 6 months in Korea in KAIST. So I moved from.
Wait a minute! I thought you spent 2 months at another institution. How does that?
Yeah, that was when I was at Korea University until 2008.
Yeah.
So I moved to Singapore in 2009, and I was there for 4 years straight without any joint appointment. But my wife still has a job in Korea. So I went to Singapore with my second daughter and being like a single father for 4 years. I found it very hard as she grew older. When she was young and she listened to me, when she became a teenager, she plugged her ears with earphone and then shut the doors. I was so scared. So I had to ship her to the mother's side. So after that, I have to spend like a year, I decided to spend 6 months in Singapore and 6 months in Korea. So that's current arrangement. So I have a position in 2 places and office in 2 places. From February to July, I'm based in Korea. From August to January, I'm based in Singapore.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I didn't honor the KAIST the way I should have in my original presentation. So know everybody that he works at KAIST. Okay, let's see. I have another question I wanted. Oh, the qualities of co-authors. You work with a lot of co-authors. You have a lot of single author papers as well. But what do you look for? What do you admire most about the qualities of your co-authors?
Well, there's some obvious complementary skill. So without complementary skill, it's better to be a single author because it requires a coordination course. This all the theory we talk about in firm actually work in the joint authorship. If you can pull everything along by yourself, do it single author. But if you can't, you need a partner, right? To work with. So I think the same advice when we advising the joint venture applies to the co-authorship. So your capability, like 3C in successful joint venture alliances, capability, commitment, and commitment. Well, I'm not sure what is the third C.
Yeah, what's the third C? I don't know.
Yeah.
Also,
no, it's compatibility. Compatibility,
okay.
capability, and commitment. So 3 is called 3C in the successful alliances. So in the French context, it's a coffee, champagne, cognac.
I see in the chat, I think Al is the name, really wants us to address the question of open source. I think Al, Sijin was suggesting, and Sijin, correct me if I'm wrong, he doesn't know, he doesn't have an opinion on this topic. I think that's what it was. So sorry, we don't mean to sidestep your question, but we're just not informed on it. Let's see, is that right, Sijin? I don't mean to speak for you.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, and then Judy, could you ask your question, please?
Hi. So I'm also interested in like phenomenon-driven studies, but like as a PhD student, I feel that there are like several challenges to publish this phenomena-driven study. So what challenges do you face when you try to publish that in a journal, and how do you overcome that?
Right. Yeah, so that's the, I also get frustrated, when people asking a theoretical contribution out of the empirical paper, right? So, if you do a phenomenon-driven study, you are doing an empirical piece. But do you think it's too much to ask a theoretical contribution? So some journals do. So and sometimes I'm not very successful in that kind of journal. But some journals are more open to just empirical contribution. SMJ is very much open to the empirical contribution. So you don't have to send it to some other journal which emphasize theoretical contribution. So I think it's very unfair in my view, because you sometimes you see a paper which is a lot of big front end, but the empirical model is very basic and somewhat not complete, right? So my take is that you try to be good in empirical piece. So do all kinds of, the robustness tests and alternatives way of the explanation. So usually the reviewers push you for that direction. So I think that if you have a good paper with a very strong empirical contribution, it should be publishable in a top tier journal.
And you may want to, I think implicit in what you were saying is it's important to choose which journal, right? Like SMJ is very, very tolerant of this, whereas AMJ is not, is mine.
Right.
So choose wisely, I guess, is one of the takeaways. Hey, a personal question here. How have you managed the COVID crisis?
I think that I'm just good or just bad as all you. Right? So watching a lot of Netflix movie and create a home gym. So I learned a great deal about Netflix movie. So I realized that in each country there's some interesting, at least one or two interesting drama series from each country. So I think I enjoy watching the Borgen it's from Norway, right? And there was some drama from Turkey and some, the Money Heist, obviously is from Spanish drama. So I think that Netflix has a great contribution to globalize and also to appreciate the culture of another country. So that's probably the lessons I learned from the COVID. But I also have a home training, like a gym. I have a running machine and the elliptical machine at home and some. So I try to not to lose too much muscle and have some physical exercise. And once you stay at home, I think that you will realize the same. There are so many things you can do about your home, right? You try to fix. You initially change the bulb and you change the LED light. You paint your wall, and you fix things.
I have to...
Tim, you're laughing.
Oh, it's so funny.
Find your activity for the last year, right?
Another thing too is you can't imagine the joy I get of seeing an Amazon package arrive at my front desk, front door. It can be addicting, ordering online and so forth. You're
right.
waiting for what comes next. Okay, so I think it's time to ask some of our silly questions, and I have several here. You mentioned you're working out. What else do you do to relax, rewind, or recharge?
Sorry? Okay,
what do you do to relax and unwind and recharge?
Right. You know, to watching Netflix drama before you go to bed for 1 hour. And that's one thing. And I play golf.
Play golf?
Yeah, I play golf. I'm not a good golfer. I'm not a good golfer. I'm losing many balls. But it's something which doesn't, you know, but going out to a field and having a sunshine and walking is a really good exercise. It makes you more optimistic with the sunlight.
We should, at the next conference, we should play golf together. That would be fun.
Yeah. But I'm a lousy golfer. I'm losing many balls.
Me too. So we would fit together. So if you could have dinner and conversation with one deceased person in history from the historical past, who would that person be?
Historical past? You mean the more recent or?
No, anyone in history.
Well,
they have to be deceased.
Has to be deceased, right? Well, I'm not sure. That's a good question. That's a surprise question. I never thought about that.
Okay, well you can pass on that if you think of something else. If you could have one superpower, like invisibility, flight, or reading minds, or whatever.
Yeah.
What would it be? What would you choose?
Well, I want to be like a space. What is called like a space, moving space in an instance? What is that?
A time traveler?
Yeah, it's not time traveler. It's more like a space traveler. From you can jump from one space to another space.
Okay.
So that will be cutting your travel time, and then you can travel around.
Okay. Yeah, you have a lot of travel.
Right. Hope I can travel more.
When you're not reading strategy work or The Economist, what do you read?
I also
or nonfiction or whatever.
Yeah. I enjoy reading some novels, and Korean novels, and the Western novel. And also I enjoy listening to the classical music. I'm a big fan of opera. So I turn on the opera singers disc and relax about 1 hour about that. Sometimes I watch the DVD on the opera for 3 hours.
Nice. Okay, I did not know that about you. Okay, and there's one more question in the chat, and I think we'll end with this one. But Jing Yang, could you ask your question?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Chang, for sharing your story. I'm very happy to figure out I'm not the only person that I enjoy Netflix so much. Sure. So my question is about the academic writing. So recently I learned that actually being a researcher is actually being a professional writer. And I know you have to clear your thoughts by writing more. And also there is a challenge of writing out your thoughts clearly and communicating with other people. Then when I read all the top journal papers, and they all have very different writing styles. So it's very, I found it's challenging to find my voice and my writing style. So I wonder how you maybe share your story about that.
Right. That's a very good question. I actually emphasize the writing side to my PhD students. Because I think that probably any paper is about 10% idea, 30% like a real work, data collection, and 60% writing. So I'm not sure how many versions of paper when I write piece, right? Because I think that comes from our discipline. So our disciplines rely on not on the mathematical model like in economics. So we rely on verbal logic. So we have to write very clearly. So non-English speaker, it can be a challenge, but I think that if you think clearly, you can write very clearly in Korean. You can write clearly. If you can write clearly in Korean, if you can write clearly in Chinese, I think you can write clearly in English. So of course, there's a minor grammatical issue. Then you can rely on copy editor. So before I sending a paper to a journal, I always ask for a copywriting. So you don't want to be in a disadvantaged position, which you can fix with a $300 like a copy editing services. But before you send it to a copy editor can only fix your English. But the writing is your way of thinking. So if you can think very clearly, so even though your grammar can be wrong, but it can be fixable with a couple of $100.
That's a little secret actually for PhD students, is that most people don't realize a lot of us send our work to copy editors. Even English writers do that on occasion. So it's not that much money, and it's certainly worth the expense. So think about that. Okay, I think it's time to end. And before we convey our gratitude to Sijin, Zhao, what's the next Meet the Scholar? When is it? Can you tell us?
Yes, everyone, we have our next Meet the Scholar on May 6th. Louis, is that right? May 6th with Professor Bruce Kogut.
Okay.
Please join us if you
Yes,
can.
that is right. Yeah. She's telling me that's the next one. Yeah.
Very good.
Show up for that. That'll be great. And for those of you who want to understand what else we're doing, take a look at our website, sign up for our social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. You'll learn all about the stuff that's happening. Thank you for showing up, everybody. It's been wonderful to get your questions and to have your participation. And Sijin, thanks so much for letting us, for honoring us with your presentation.
Thank you very much, team, for having me, and thank you for attending this talk. I hope to see you in person sometime in the near future.
Yes, I hope so too. So long, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.